I'm Andy Cole, Director of Educational Technology for District 30, and welcome to this special virtual Parent Night. I'd like to welcome and introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. Devorah Heitner is the author of Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive and Survive in Their Digital World, and also the founder of Raising Digital Natives. Dr. Heitner's work has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and CNN Opinion. She has a PhD in Media, Technology, and Society from Northwestern University and has taught at DePaul and Northwestern universities. Her mission is to cultivate a culture of empathy and social-emotional literacy. We'd like to welcome her back to District 30. Devorah, we're thrilled to have you joining us this evening.
And then I would love to take questions as well. So one of the things I just want to mention right at the top is that we're kind of swimming through a lot of news here. We're 2 years deep into a pandemic. There's been a lot going on in our country, politically, environmentally, et cetera. And I just want to mention this because that's another thing that's keeping a lot of us glued to their phones. Some of us are checking the COVID numbers all the time. Some of us are checking other political things or environmental issues, or we're just reading all kinds of news. There's so much happening. But it's important to, just take a break from the news. Not that we want to be uninformed, but we don't need to check, multiple news sources about the same thing multiple times a day most of the time, right? That's not always helpful. And also, it's important that we model an engaged relationship with news with our kids, but also that we model putting it away and especially not doom scrolling before bedtime. And just know that even if you have little kids in your house, if you're listening to the news in the car or watching news with them, or watching news while they're in the room on TV, or if they can read and you're leaving the paper around. Again, all of this is great. Kids should be engaged in current events. And clearly, the kids know a lot about what's happening. They know there's a pandemic. It's not like we can protect them from it, but it's important that we think about how we're talking about it with them, dependent, not just COVID news, but all kinds of news, whether they're younger or older, right? The older your kids are, the more they can read regular news sources with you and learn and talk with you at the dinner table about it. When they're younger, and especially, elementary school and younger elementary school, they may want to be using, if you want to learn about current events together with kids, you may want to be using some of the school library and public library resources like, Time for Kids, National Geographic for Kids, because they're going to be both content wise and reading level wise a better fit for opening up that discussion. Now we know our kids are growing up, in public, and this is the title of my next book, Growing Up in Public. And a lot of what our kids are facing is having a digital footprint, having a reputation. And this starts before our kids even get on TikTok and social media and games and start putting themselves out in the world. It starts when we start sharing about them. So a really important thing that I want to remind parents to think about is asking our kids permission before we share their image, asking our kids permission before we share news about them. And the older our kids are, the more protective they are of their reputations, the more important that is, and their privacy. So a lot of tweens and teens are going to be really protective on that front. But even if they're younger and they're not really aware of us posting, ideally we're asking, or we're at least considering, will my future kid, my 6-year-old is dancing around with a lampshade in their underpants, but will my kid at 13 want this picture out there? Will my kid, when they run for Congress, want their picture out there? It's always best to think about the future, and if in doubt, don't share it out, right? Take the picture and show it to their future spouse when they come over. Take the picture and share it within the family, but maybe don't share it on social media where it can so easily wind up being seen by folks we don't think about being on our social, or, in some way can feel like our kids' boundaries have been transgressed when someone they don't even really know comes up to them and says, hey, I heard you did so well in your violin concert. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, I saw the 20-minute video your dad posted to Facebook. And they're like, what? So just think about it, and the other thing that asking kids permission really does is it creates a boundary that kids then know that they can have with their friends. So they know that they can say no to something being posted, and they know they should ask their friends permission before they post about friends. And this is a really important reason why we want to model these kind of boundaries at home. We also want to reduce the appearance pressure on kids, which can become an issue sometimes in middle school, or even for some kids younger, where they want to look cute all the time because they're being photographed. We don't want our kids to be overly focused on that. So In a world where, pictures get likes and responses, we may not want to go, share so much of that with our kids because we don't want to get them too hooked on likes. The flip side is, some kids are really going to enjoy being kind of out there and social and getting a lot of numbers. So we can talk about, how to support that without, we don't want to shame kids for kind of enjoying being public, but we also don't want to kind of push it on them or kind of nudge them in that direction necessarily. Now, a lot of us in the last 2 years have had a lot of togetherness with our families, maybe more than usual. I know I've been working from home and traveling less. My husband's been working from home and traveling less. Our son has been doing fewer activities away from us as well. And so this time has been a lot of togetherness, which of course has silver linings, but for a lot of us has left us craving a little bit of alone time. And a lot of us use our devices to get that alone time. We sit on the couch with our family, but we're, all up in our phone or a tablet. Our kids, might be all up in the Nintendo Switch or, a shared device or their own device if they have one. And when we're using devices to sort of get space from one another, it's a good thing to notice. Now, we're all going to do this some of the time. So this is not me saying, oh my gosh, your family's in trouble. That's not it at all. But we just want to be aware, if I'm using my phone to get space, maybe I actually want to go out for a walk, or maybe I actually want to go in another room and do a different activity, or maybe I want to put my phone down and attend to my family and get space in another way, or maybe I do need, time alone and I should take a shower or whatever. So these are just some things to think about, because when we default and habituate to our devices as the only way to kind of get space from one another, it's really easy for that to become kind of an endless rabbit hole of time. So rather than thinking, wow, I could use some space for my family, maybe I'm going to go in the other room and like blast my song and, pick up a little, but also have some me time. What passes for me time in a pandemic? But that's a little different than just kind of going on Twitter, which has no ending cue, right? Whereas if I decide I'm going to listen to my song, the song is going to end. So kids may need space too, and they may need space from their siblings. They may need space from us. Little kids will go in a box or behind the couch or under their bed. Older kids may enjoy a reading nook, under a loft bed or in a closet. I know it's very cold right now, but some of our kids will want to get outside and have a little spot in the yard or a little spot in the neighborhood that they go. That's where they're allowed to be, to have space. I know you guys have a great public library in your community, so maybe that's a place kids can go to get some space from home, be out in the world, but still maybe have some alone time, curl up in a beanbag and read. It's important for kids to be able to figure that out and have space. And obviously, different ages of kids can take different amounts of space. I know you're not going to send your 5-year-old by themselves to, the library. But I think it's really important to just recognize when we're using our tech devices this way. A lot of parents have also asked me how to re-engage kids with analog interests, drawing, reading, books, going outside, because they've gotten so sort of hooked into tech during the last 2 years. And I want to talk about the reasons for that. I mean, some of them are obvious, right? Like kids were cut off from some activities. They were cut off from maybe seeing friends in person. We're still not socializing the way we did before. There's a lot of things we're still not doing. We're not traveling the way we did before. So depending on how much you've changed your life or have, kind of cut off certain activities, screens may fill in some of that space, but there's also novelty there. And that's what's so important for all of us. We all crave novelty. And for me, not traveling, not going outside of my neighborhood, sometimes for days at a time, the reduced novelty, really hits me. And so then that's where I want that new series on Netflix, or I want that new, show on Hulu, or I want that really funny TikTok video, because the screen is going to bring that novelty into my life that's currently lacking. And our kids are feeling that too, in many cases. So it's where their friends are, especially if they're not doing, as much with play dates or as many activities or sleepovers, things like that. And B, it's novelty. So we can bring some novelty into the home activities just by rotating things around, right? I'm not saying throw money at the problem. Go to the library and get some new books to read, and let your kids go with you and pick them out, right, if possible, because they feel so invested in their choices, and that's going to get them excited to read. Switch out the art materials. So if you have a million things out for your kids all the time, switch out those smelly markers and take those away and put in the, watercolors. So it's not about even so much buying new things as rotating the things you may already have. You can certainly do some swaps of games and things with neighbors as well, especially now that we know that, COVID isn't really on surfaces. You could always let them sit for a few days if you want to be extra careful. You could quarantine a board game for a couple of days. But it's such a great opportunity. We've learned a lot of board games during this time. I can recommend a few in the Q&A if you want to hear what my family likes. But the point is, it's the novelty and not so much even the content of what's on our screens that's sometimes so compelling. And when we remember that, it's easy to start to balance with some in-person novelty. Even just taking a walk in a different direction is, a fun way to introduce some novelty right now, even if you're not going into places. We also want to see, what does self-regulation look like? A lot of us have never let our kids experience self-regulation with screens because we're so nervous about how much time they spend. And we've been told, it's bad for them. They shouldn't be on games too long, or they shouldn't be on social media too long, or they shouldn't be watching TV for too long. And all of that, has its place, right? We probably don't want our kids doing this, 24/7. At the same time, it will be interesting to find out, when does your kid actually walk away? When are they done? Because if we're spending all of our time regulating them, then we'll never find out. Now, you may not be comfortable with this experiment, and that's fine. But if you have an older kid and you've been having a lot of conflict with them, one thing you could do is say, well, let's do an experiment on a day when we don't have anything else going on, and where, maybe you don't have homework to do that day or anything to get done. And let's just see what it looks like if, after breakfast and chores, you just like go do the thing you want to do on screens. And like, I'll be curious to see like when you're done. Like, when will you walk away? And it might be that your kid is sort of glued there all day, or they might at a certain point, pick something else up and walk away. And that would be really interesting to see. It's also interesting to see kids together. Do they encourage, if you have siblings or friends over, do they encourage each other to do other things or not? I know some of you may feel like, I'm not comfortable with this experiment. I really need to regulate the screen time. And that is totally your prerogative. And there are many days where just the screen time is going to be externally regulated by, we have to go to grandma's now, or we have to get homework done, or we have to, eat a meal together. So there may not be as much open-ended time. And the other thing to think about is, at some point you will be dropping this kid off at college, or they'll be leaving you to go to work or the military or something. They're going to do something in the future, right? And I know for those of you who have 6 and 7-year-olds, that seems very far away. And for those of you who have 13-year-olds, it also may seem really far away. But it is going to happen. And so you want to think about that kid in their dorm room, right? And they're not going to have someone to take away their phone at night. So at some point, they do need to learn to self-regulate. Okay. A lot of our kids have spent a lot of time, especially in the last 2 years, but in general in our culture, gaming is super popular. And when we look at the games that are out there now, and these are just 2 images of Fortnite and Minecraft, but we can look at the whole suite of games that is within the Roblox universe. There's so many games for, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, online games. There's sports related games, fantasy related games, cooperative games, games where kids are building worlds. There's all kinds of things going on in games. And games have been a way for kids to hang out, together, even when they couldn't hang out in person. They're also, for some kids, really fun just as solo activities. The appealing thing about a lot of games is the world is kind of customized to you, and you're in it, and it's really immersive, and you have a lot of control and agency. And those are also things that our kids haven't had a lot of during this time. Kids are missing a lot of the sort of developmental stuff because of COVID, right? They haven't been out in the world having as many experiences. I see it with my own 7th grader who, school shut down in 5th grade, and a lot of development happens between 5th and 7th grade, and he and his friend group haven't had some of those crucial experiences in the world because of COVID, right? And so in games, there's a tremendous amount, again, of agency, autonomy, independence. And when your character dies, you just start again at that same level. So there's also this really low cost of failure, which is incredibly appealing. You can be proud of your kid for being really good at games and still want to have some balance in their lives. I want them to have other activities. So I want you to understand why games are so immersive, because if you have a little gamer, it's important to kind of get that. That said, that immersiveness can be a challenge with balance, right? So some kids have a hard time unplugging from games to go to bed or do their homework, and those are kids who need support, right? And realistically, a lot of our kids have a lot going on. Some of your kids are probably into sports. They have a lot of homework. They have things to do. You would like them to do some chores around the house, which is great for kids to do. It's really important for kids to feel like they're contributing at any age to the family's well-being. Even if it's very small tasks, it's still very important that they still get done and that kids feel like they are needed. So we want our kids to have all of that. I would really, if you're concerned about your child's gaming, try to join them a little. You don't have to become an expert at their game, but you want to know enough about the games that they play to understand some things. One thing you really want to know with games that are played on a laptop or a connected device like a tablet or a phone is this a game on a public server? And if so, who is my child playing with? Are they meeting their friends on the public server? Are they playing with whoever is there, which could be fine, but you will kind of want to know that. The younger your child is, the more concerned I would be about the public server and the more cautious I would be about who they're playing with on there. The older they are and the more judgment and savvy they typically have in their interactions, the less worried I would be. That doesn't necessarily mean I would want, a fifth or sixth grader who's savvy disappearing into their bedroom on a public server without any kind of supervision or check-in. I think ideally, you might want a child playing on a public server to be playing in a public part of the house where you can kind of hear and eavesdrop a little. So maybe not the headphones, at least not all the time. Now, the headphones may be necessary if you're trying to work 2 feet away, so I understand why you would get them the headphones, but at some point it's good to know what the tenor and the kind of tone of the conversation they're having. Another question is if your child is playing games with others, how are they communicating with them? Are they on chat with them? Are they on an app called Discord, which is an app that some kids use to communicate and some adults use to communicate when they're gaming? Do they open up a Google Hangout or a voice chat? So you want to know some questions about how kids are connecting, who they're talking to. If they're playing a console game, they're more likely to be playing on their own, like Nintendo Switch or PlayStation, or with someone in the room. But you can also share codes with someone, so they may be playing together. So again, how are they communicating? One of the trickier things for us as parents is on a laptop or a tablet, it's hard to know what our kids are doing, right? They might be playing Roblox or, which is a suite of games. They might be playing a game within Roblox, or they might be doing math homework. So that's where you kind of want to probe a little more deeply and find out kind of how they're using their time and if they're finding the games to be a distraction. If it's possible to separate the games from the device that they use for school, that's ideal. Certainly the nice thing for me, conversely, with the Switch or other kind of console games is that I know that he's gaming, right? Like I'm not confused. I'm not looking at my kid using the Nintendo Switch and wondering if he's doing his math homework. So that's kind of handy as a parent. You may have found during this time that the siblings in your home are getting along great, and this has been a really bonding time for them. Or you may have found that the pandemic kind of trapped a couple of kids or more than a couple of kids in your house who are at very different ages and stages and have very different interests and are having a harder time getting on. In that case, especially in that case, if the screens bring them together, whether it's family movie night or shared gaming, then I would celebrate that. If that's the place where your kids can interact, and that's kind of maybe one of the few areas where they get along. I'm not saying again that you want to sort of seed the universe and say, okay, fine, play Minecraft 24/7. But I would celebrate that as a place that kids of very different ages sometimes can be together, maybe more easily than others. Or maybe it's, again, movie night or some other, tech thing. But if you can bring the family together for a shared show, for example, a TV show, an ongoing series, I mean, winter in Chicago, like this is a great time to have a regular show that you watch. We just finished Friday Night Lights in my family. Wouldn't probably be a great fit for younger kids, was great for us and our 7th grader. And now we're watching The West Wing. And interestingly enough, both Friday Night Lights and The West Wing, which were family faves for us before, and West Wing, even before he was born, he's like pretty critical of, right? Because he's a progressive kid in 2022. And he's just like, this is a really paternalistic show. And these people are being kind of sexist and racist. And we're like, oh, yeah, I see that. So it's been really fun watching it with him, but also hearing his criticism of it. Friday Night Lights gave us a great opportunity to talk about some things that, haven't come up yet for us, especially given that, again, the world shut down when our kid was in 5th grade. And so, I always caution parents not to be too sure, right? You don't want to be like, I'm so sure my kid hasn't been offered alcohol, but I happen to know that my kid hasn't been to a party since he was 10. So I think that's probably true. You can never really know, right? But I have a stronger sense of where he's been than I might have been without the pandemic. And so the show gave us an opportunity to talk about things like drinking and parties and a lot of, more advanced kind of teenage stuff that some people might shy away from talking about with an 11 or 12 or 13-year-old viewer. But for me, that advanced look, and not to turn everything into like the after school special and the lecture, but more like, wow, that character really got into a pickle when they just told a couple people their parents would be away and to come over, and suddenly it turned into a big party. Like, what could they have done? And really talking about the character's choices. And again, that particular show wouldn't be for everyone. There's a lot of teenagers having sex and drinking and other things that maybe wouldn't be a fit for your family. But when we do see content like that, it's an opportunity to discuss. Now, it's harder to find a family show when the kids are like third grade and under that works for older kids. Like, I say you have a second grader and a high schooler. But I will say that depending on your kind of tolerance and limits, some folks I know have found some family shows that work for everyone pretty well. And yeah, my friend Carrie Goldman wrote a great article for the New York Times this year about, or in 2021, about watching Schitt's Creek with her family, for example. And she has one kid who identifies as queer. And so for their family, it was really helpful, even for the younger siblings, to see a show that really celebrated that identity, for example. And so even though some of the content she wasn't sure about for her youngest, it worked for their family. And really, it's a great article. I can send it to you if you have trouble finding it and you want to read it. Sleep is really important. And sometimes screens can be the thieves of sleep for all of us, even for us adults. Checking our phone in bed, doing that doom scrolling I mentioned earlier, playing games in bed, certainly checking your work email right before you go to sleep is a recipe for bad sleep or anxious sleep. It's so important that our kids understand the importance of sleep. And during this time, especially, they need their sleep for their immunity, they need their sleep for their health. One of the last talks I got to give in person with kids, which I love talking to kids and I miss being in the room with kids so much. But I was with this group of teenagers in Portland, Oregon at a high school. And I said to them, and they're all like clutching their coffee and looking exhausted. And I said to them, if you had access to a drug that was free and legal and had no negative side effects and only made you smarter, better looking, more athletic, and in a better mood, would you want it? And they were like, yeah, bring it on. And I was like, it's sleep. Sleep is going to make you smarter and better looking and more athletic and in a better mood. And they were like, oh, because, by then, and even often by middle school, kids think staying up later and working harder is the thing to do when they have a big test, for example. And actually going to bed early and getting those Z's is the thing to do. It's so, so, so important. If your kid is having a hard time waking up in the morning, if they are grumpy, definitely try taking the connected devices out of the room if you haven't tried that. Look at what activities they're doing before bedtime. Activities that are really exciting, like gaming or looking at TikTok, frankly, or social media, which kind of exacerbates, or activates rather the competitive and excited part of our brains, may not be so great right before bed. So even though you may feel like, oh, I want all the homework done before my kid games, it may be better for them, for some families, to do a little bit of that in the afternoon. Maybe they have to get some homework done first, maybe not. It depends how much they have and what other things they've got going on. Your kid may also be too busy to play games during the week. If you have a kid who's like, in gymnastics 20 hours a week and has a significant amount of homework, that's not a kid who probably has time to have like significant gaming time during the week. Just the reality is, unless they're taking the bus to meets and they can play on the Nintendo Switch, but I would rather see them maybe hanging with their teammates on the bus. So I think it's really important to be realistic about what's possible. And, we don't want our kids to quit their activities to game either. But I just think we have to really look at our lives and say, is this like my kid has one night of the week with 2 activities back to back, which is not something I would recommend. And doesn't, if I was following my own advice, we wouldn't have that. But this is the bar mitzvah year and this is what happened. We have 2 activities back to back that couldn't be rescheduled. And that's not a night that he gets any recreational screen time, right? It just doesn't work that way. And in our family, you don't get like extra another night to make up for it. There's not like an entitlement to a certain amount of time. Different families do things differently, and it may work for you to have kind of a screen time allowance for your kids for a certain amount of time. Certainly for in-app purchases, if they are going to be able to spend money online, I would recommend, really thinking about that and planning that, like an allowance or money they have to earn. Maybe they can shovel some snow later this week if they want to buy those, in-app skins or anything. But to come back to sleep, it's so important to think about where the devices live at night, where they're charging. If you have a kid who is maybe prone to be a little bit extra attached and has a harder time letting go, maybe you keep the device in your room at night. If you have a kid who's pretty compliant, charging downstairs may be good enough. But this is really important, and there's really no reason for an elementary or middle schooler to sort of need their device overnight. If they're saying they need it to wake up in the morning, I would really just look at getting them a cheap alarm clock. A lot of our kids, as I mentioned from earlier, that I learned to ski this year, learned to ski. I'm walking around on my skis and calling myself cross country skiing, but I'm doing it. It's so fun. And I learned on YouTube. And kids are learning how to cook on YouTube. They're learning how to make slime on YouTube. They're learning hacks to get better at their games on YouTube. They're also learning some stuff on TikTok. TikTok has some really great content on, how to organize your fridge, how to study when you have ADHD, all kinds of really interesting things. Both TikTok and YouTube also have horrendous content that we don't want our kids to watch. So we'll get to that in a minute. But if they're watching how-to content, have them actually do the thing. You know, do the hack that you learned on Minecraft. Make the pasta, make the cupcakes. I want to see some results. So if your kid is obsessed with how-to content, if they're doing makeup tutorials, let them do your makeup. I mean, have fun with it. It's really important that we see some of these skills go into real life. Otherwise, it's kind of the time is less useful, and also I think it holds kids a little bit accountable. Like, are you paying attention? Like, you're watching, slime tutorial after slime tutorial, but like, where's the slime? I want to see the slime. Okay, so we want to understand our kids' digital world, and several of you wrote in advance with questions about getting kids phones and other things. I'm happy to really engage on that in the Q&A, but let me talk about some things that kids want. I talked about how they want novelty. They want worlds where they can be independent. They want space and privacy. They want to be able to focus on things that they really enjoy and see images of things they really enjoy. They want to kind of get out of their heads a little bit after school sometimes and be more, like calm. Some kids are, kind of stressed after school. Hopefully not, because I know they go to great schools. But, you know, school can be stressful certain days. And so you come home, you want to kind of veg out a little. You want to watch a TV show. So we want to kind of understand kids' digital world. Like, who are they interacting with? Or if they're texting or communicating. And a lot of kids text before they have phones using their schools. Either like Google Chat or other things, or they're texting in a game. So for those of you whose kids don't have phones yet, but they are sort of, writing and reading, they may be texting. If you have a kid who's not reading yet, they're probably not texting. They might be FaceTiming. If they grab your phone, they may FaceTime their grandparents or other people in the family. It could be adorable. It could be a problem. You have to kind of understand what they want from these devices. When we're looking at our kids' digital world, we have to remember that it's a different experience than we have. And so really observing them and saying, oh, like, my kid's really into Lego animation. They're watching YouTube videos about how to do it. They always want to use my phone to do Lego animation. Like, maybe this is okay with me. Maybe I support this. Maybe I want to get them an app for a device that they have access to. Maybe it doesn't have to be their device. It could be a shared device, but maybe I want to get them an animation app. Maybe I want to like have them, remind them that they could play some music on the piano or their drums to, be a soundtrack for that, right? So there's some interest we may notice if we pay more attention to what our kids are doing that we may want to encourage. They also may be into a TikTok or a YouTube, following someone that we are not very excited about. So we want to pay attention enough to have a sense of where they're walking around. Just like if our kids said, I'm going to downtown Glenview, you'd want to know, well, where are you going? Are you going to the library? Are you going to the bagel shop? Are you, are you going to the toy store? Like, what are you doing? When are you coming back? You want to know a little bit about where they're hanging out online. That doesn't necessarily mean, and I did have families write in and say, should I, read my kids' texts, for example? Should I follow every place they go? My answer is certainly covertly doing this has a lot of downsides. So I would not sneak around and, read their text behind their back. I actually, if I was going to read texts, I would do it overtly and I would let them know, hey, we just got this phone. I want to make sure you and your friends are interacting in, a way that seems good and positive. So let's look at it every couple days together. And you can show me some texts. And then if I see that it's going well, I'm not going to look, but I will ask to see it if I'm concerned about something. And I would ask you to bring it to me if you're concerned about something, if you have a friend you're worried about, if the group text is going off the rails and you need some advice about how to help or if you should leave. Those are some good situations to bring to me. And then keep your word, right? You don't need to be reading every communication your kid has with friends. Now, there are all kinds of exceptions with this. Like if you are, in a situation where your kid is communicating with someone you have some concerns about, you may want to look more. If your kid has been in an abusive relationship, if your kid is having serious mental health issues, those are situations where you may want to look more. Again, I wouldn't do it covertly in most cases. If you're in an emergency situation, if you need to intervene in a way that might save your child's life, then do whatever you need to do, of course. But for most of us, we're looking out of curiosity. We're looking because our kids at the same age, they start to talk more with peers, start talking less with us. And that's a pretty typical transition, and it's developmentally appropriate. So we don't need to know everything. We don't need to know the time they're mad at us and they text, I hate my mom or I hate my dad, because that feeling goes away, but that text won't go out of your mind for a while, right? And so it might be better that you don't see it because their friends might talk them down. Their friends might be like, I feel that way sometimes too, but I love your mom. Come on. Or they might be like, hey, are you okay? And be really supportive. But maybe you don't need to read that. And I think it's important for young people to feel like they can trust that they have some space and some privacy. So I would instead be really focused on what are they getting from the internet? Are they on a thread on Reddit where they're being encouraged to, be in a divisive situation politically, or are they being encouraged in some way that's hateful on YouTube? Those would be very concerning things to me. But like, do you really want to read the 6th or 7th or 8th grade group text? I think you might not want to because you're going to also relive middle school and it will be painful. Instead, you might want to just keep the door open and make sure your kid knows, hey, if people are talking in a mean way about other kids, remember, you don't want to be part of that. You don't want to be responsible for that. You want to leave conversations where stuff like that's happening. We also need to remind kids, because they spend so much time in gaming sites or Reddit or places where they don't know the other people potentially, that they don't have to upstand when they don't know the other people. When other people are being jerks and you're on the internet, the great thing about the internet is you can just bug out. You can just leave. If you're in 3rd grade and someone makes a hateful comment on Minecraft or uses a slur, you can just go. You don't need to upstand. You don't need to be the 9-year-old that saves Minecraft from this person. And that's so important because our kids want to be. They want to be the 9-year-old that saves Minecraft, but they can just get out. If it's their friend, if you're on the 6th grade group text and everyone's like, let's start a new group text without Julia, that's when you can intervene if you feel up to it. Or if you're in 6th grade, you can use your parents as an excuse. Even if they're not actually reading all your texts, you can say, my mom sometimes looks at my phone, I'm going to get in trouble. Or I don't want to be part of this conversation, I think this is going in a bad direction. Or you can just say, I've got to go, I've got to do homework, but actually quietly leave the text. There's a lot of ways out, and we do need to give our kids a lot of language and a lot of strategies to get out of some of these tricky social situations, but we can't really do it for them. And we should anticipate that sometimes there will be conflicts between friends, and sometimes our kids may not be in the right. Sometimes our kids will be the one who said something they thought was funny and other people felt offended, right? Or our kids will, text somebody 50 times when they can't reach them. It's not always going to be the other kids getting it wrong. And so we all need to have a little grace and remember that kids mess up and that it's okay, right? That kids are going to make mistakes with each other socially, and that the challenge in the digital age is we're going to see the screenshot and it's going to be hard to remember. And especially, I don't know about you, but as a mom, sometimes I'm like, I'll remember the kid that did my kid wrong for a while. That's going to stick in my brain. But we have to try to let it go as much as possible. Obviously, if something's very serious, we can let school know and other things. But, that some of the day-to-day stuff, like certainly the kid who, texts your kid 60 times when they can't reach them, like, let it go, right? You can let your kid know, instead of blowing up at that friend or yelling at them or saying, this is so annoying, you can just like say, hey, I was eating dinner, and when my phone buzzes all the time when I'm eating dinner, it kind of like stresses me out, so maybe don't text so many times, right? But there's a way to talk to friends about these things, and I think it's really helpful to give our kids some grace and give their friends some grace in these years of learning. And this is like the 3rd grader who gets too aggressive during Minecraft or other online gaming situations. One school I went to, also right before the pandemic, I was with these 6th graders, and I said, does anyone have a friend who gets just like too mad when they game? And this little boy raises his hand and he says, sometimes the friend is me, which is an incredibly self-aware thing to say. And his friends were like, yeah, dude, sometimes the friend is you. But it was very really sweet because they also really were talking about. I asked, like, what are some strategies you can use if you have a friend who's getting too mad? And the kids all had these great strategies for helping kids self-soothe, right? Like, oh, let's go outside, or it's just a game, or let's take a break for a while. And if the kids themselves were getting too upset, they talked about breathing. So these are kids who are pretty literate in some really good social and emotional techniques and some brain calming techniques. And sometimes it takes a reminder. For a lot of kids, after gaming or time on YouTube or TikTok, it can be helpful to take some breaths or do some physical exercise or drink some water or eat a snack, because sometimes we defer our bodily needs while we're busy with these really entrancing, exciting digital spaces. So I want to talk a little bit about the algorithms in TikTok and YouTube and also in Instagram and other social media. And I don't know how many of you tuned into the hearings from Facebook in the fall about the ways that algorithms, unfortunately, can kind of pile on when folks are having a hard time already. So, you go and search like one thing about dieting because you're having a day where you feel like maybe you should, you think something's wrong with your body, which of course none of us want our kids to feel that way or to diet anyway. That's already like a dangerous road. But then to even more so, like they might then get fed some really negative, really problematic things. And Instagram is just one of the many algorithmic based spaces our kids are spending time in. But that's a good example of why it can be tricky, even though it can also be a positive, fun space. And for a lot of kids, the positives do outweigh the negatives, and that it is a fun space to hang out, and the rewards are there for them. But for some kids it's a little tricky, and there's all of us are going to have some experiences on social media or algorithmic search spaces like YouTube or TikTok that are problematic. So here I love this example of pandas. Like, who wouldn't want our kids looking at pandas? I'd let my first grader look at pandas all day long. Pandas are great, pandas are cute. And over here, the algorithm thinks the next thing we should look at is women in religious cults from Conspiracy Doc. Well, I don't know about you. I don't want my first grader going down that road. I don't think that's very good. And my first grader might not be able to read or have context to know what that is. So they might just click. And an eighth grader might be like, ooh, women in religious cults, Conspiracy Doc. I'm 13. I want to know about the conspiracy. Bring it on, right? So either way, it's concerning, because once we hit that button on women in religious cults and check out some of those 40 minutes, like think about what some of the suggested videos might be from there. It's not going to be good. I don't want to know, but I do want to know if my kid knows. So if my kid is doing YouTube, I want to ideally be in the room or be adjacent or be checking in or have them show me some of the things they're doing on there. Meanwhile, my seventh grader might be on YouTube in the other room. So, I need to check in right after this and be like, what were you doing? What were you watching? How was it going? Did you do your math homework? So, trust me, I'm living in the same world you do. The internet comes into my house too. We are not unplugged, right? And it's tricky because there is some really great content. There is some really helpful content. There's content that has been really helpful to our family, that we've learned a lot from, that we've enjoyed. And there's some really problematic content, and it's really easy to find. So when kids are younger, ideally we're with them when they're using these kind of open-ended spaces, even Google searches. When kids are older, we need to talk to them about content we expect them not to use. Some of us may filter, but we need to know that the filters are not a complete solution, that kids can go around the filters, that content finds its way through the filter, that no filter is as smart as you are. And sometimes filters, if they're too strict, also cut off a lot of content that's useful, unfortunately. So they're very imprecise. I would not count on them to do the job for you. You have to talk to your kids about pornography, violence, and other content you don't want them to take in. And especially if they're really following specific people on YouTube or TikTok, or influencers on Instagram, or celebrities, you want to have a look at some of those feeds and what those people are posting. Is in most cases, for most kids, in middle or high school or elementary school, the peers are not as big a concern in terms of what they might post. Now, I'm not talking about I'm not saying that peers could never post anything bad, but I'm more concerned about what some of these influencers are posting, or, a famous YouTuber versus like your classmate, and what they might post and the ways they might be influential. So I think it's important to look at both. I think a lot of us feel like, oh, my kid's going to get in with all these peers. Well, they're going to get in with the same kids that they are in with already. In most cases, kids are not often looking to befriend people they are not in school with or that they don't know. So if your kid is hanging out with nice kids, chances are they're also playing Fortnite or Minecraft with those same nice kids, or they're, on if they're getting on Instagram or group texting, they're doing that with those same nice kids. Again, it's worth finding out, of course, and contacts and the whole universe of who your child is in contact with, whether it's through gaming or a phone or texting, is very important. Think about any time you've been upset about something you saw on your phone. It was probably your contacts, right? It was probably not just some random thing about your phone. It's probably someone texted you some upsetting information, or you saw someone post something that offended you or bothered you or made you feel bad. And that's the same for our kids. So thinking about who they're in contact with is a huge piece of this universe. A lot of people think, should I get my kid a phone or not a phone? And that is one question, but also, if they do have a phone, who are they in contact with? Or if they are going to watch YouTube, what are they going to watch? Or if they are going to game, what games are they going to play and with whom? So we need to think about screen time in a more nuanced way. It's not just time on device. It's like, are they spending time creatively, or are they just consuming? Are they spending time, doing solo things on the screen, or things that connect them with others? And all of those can be good. Consuming could be good. They could be reading a great book or watching a great movie, right? But we want to maybe think about a balance of consumption versus creativity. We want to think about a balance of solo versus connected time. And especially for our kids who've maybe gotten very into having all their social lives be digital in the last 2 years, what can we do to kind of get them back into some in-person socializing, right? How can we reintegrate that? Maybe it's even having friends over to play the games in person, which is a real step, right? It is different to play a video game in person with friends, but maybe they play in person and then they go out and sled for a bit. We might want to add some other activities to the mix. Here's a fun mother-daughter TikTok. For those of you who haven't spent time on TikTok, if your kids are into TikTok, definitely have your kids show you TikTok. There's some very funny videos, some very silly videos, some useful things, again, about how to organize your fridge or, optimize the mileage on your hybrid car. And there's some really problematic content about drugs and alcohol or self-harm. There's huge range, right? There's a lot of silly dances. TikTok started out as a music and dance-focused app. And still a lot of the popular videos have music underneath, and that's part of how they get found in the algorithm. If your kid is making TikToks or YouTubes, you need to know. There's no question that kids should not be out there putting themselves out there, especially with a public account, without your knowledge at this age. So you should know, and the younger they are, the more you may want to be the editor-in-chief. You may want to see what they're going to do before they post, if you even want to greenlight them posting at all. Some kids do have private accounts. But you want to know if your kid is putting themselves out there, even just in a small group of friends, you want to know kind of what kinds of things they're posting, and that's important. And you also may want to encourage them to shoot videos in a public place in the house, which is going to encourage a different kind of video than someone might make in their bedroom. And really talk about boundaries and what kids are disclosing. In my new book on growing up in public, I've been interviewing a lot of kids about what they share in places like Discord, which is the app that I mentioned earlier, where you can use it as a voice channel when you game, but there's also a lot of spaces in Discord where you can just come together to talk with people. You can come together to talk about anime. You can come together to talk about, a certain novel or TV shows. There's actually really interesting stuff both on Discord and on TikTok where young people are reviewing books, which is great. Right? But there's also a lot of other conversations that are more personal and highly disclosing, where kids are talking about their mental health, for example. And that would concern me somewhat. Depending on where my kid was at, I would be pretty concerned if they were doing a lot of disclosure about mental health, especially if they didn't have other support. If they were doing it in addition to therapy or another organized form of support, that might be less concerning, but I would still also want their therapist to know that they were in these Discords or in these places kind of having conversations potentially with strangers of different ages about mental health. We know that sometimes kids and adults too get really disinhibited when they're online and make rude comments. And it's so important that our kids know that if they have a disagreement with someone, they can take it up with them face to face. They can decide if it's important. There are many times where I've read something and been like, I disagree with that, but I don't write a comment because you know what? It doesn't really matter what I think. In some cases, or writing a comment isn't the most effective way for me to interface with that particular issue. And so it's so important to think about, first of all, like, if I don't, the old adage of if you don't have anything nice to say, that's a huge thing. And then think about if I do want to make a comment, what is important about it? And remember that there's a human being on the other end. And this is important whether we're texting, whether we're making a comment in a game, whether we're commenting on social media, or whether we're commenting on an article, even in the Washington Post. Like, I've written some of those. Like, there's a person on the other end of that, you know? Before you say she's a stupid idiot who doesn't know anything, you might want to read the article. Or maybe don't comment if that's what you think because you disagree. Okay. But does it matter? Do we have to make these kinds of comments? And it's so important whether we're on a parenting Facebook page or, you know, reading our kids group text with them and, encouraging them to engage in a nice way. We don't always have to agree with people, but we can be civil and we can also choose to where to spend our energy. And sometimes our energy is not best spent in these kinds of conversations. All right. I want to move to Q&A. So I'm just going to put this up for a second so that if you want to join my email list and come hang out with me on email, I have an email list where I send useful emails about once a month, but I also do a little 7-day family tech reset if you want that. Just text the word tech, TECH, to 66866 and you can join my email list. And let me go to the Q&A. And I also got some questions in advance, which is so awesome. So I'm going to also look at those. But let me just look at this.
Yeah, if anyone has a question they would like to submit, please put it into the Q&A. Otherwise, there were a number of people who greatly submitted some advanced questions as well that we can start with too.
Yeah, I'm going to grab those to start. So one of those was, how do I know when my kid is ready for a phone? And so I'm just going to start with that and then I'm going to pull these up. So one of the ways you might know that your kid is sort of, no, I mean, who needs a smartphone, right? We all of us on this call probably lived, for plenty of years without one. But kids need a phone potentially when they're out in the community more on their own and independently, when they are, having responsibility for others. Certainly if they are going to babysit other kids and be alone in a home with them, they might need a phone because at that point, like if I hired a teenage babysitter when my son was younger and they showed up without a phone, I wouldn't have known what to do because we don't have a home phone. I guess we would have left one of our phones with them for them to, call 911 if needed or call us if needed. But certainly by the time your kid is, old enough to go to somebody's house and get paid money to babysit for their kids, they probably need a phone. In all seriousness, I would work your way down from that level of responsibility. If your kid is old enough to take public transportation, you may want them to have a phone. If your kid is old enough to be out in the community a little bit on their own, they may not need one, right? So you could send a fourth grader for a bike ride around the neighborhood, I would argue, in Glenview and in many places that we're lucky enough to be, without a phone, right? There's someone first of all, you're not in a super remote area, so they're not going to like get out somewhere where there's going to be no one if they need help. And also, they can just come home if they need you, or they can yell real loud, right? We need to get serious about really prepping our kids for phones in the years before they have them. So we want to start giving them opportunities to practice communication, practice being patient, practice working out conflicts. And then they don't also need to get a phone that has everything. You don't necessarily need to go from no phone to a phone with like Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and texting. Maybe they just want to learn texting for the first year. And then maybe you might let them add a social app or something if they want that, right? Not all kids want social media, by the way. And another question I sometimes get asked is, should I worry if my kid doesn't want social media? No, do not worry. Social media is a place that can be really fun. It's also can be a place where kids feel quite left out. It can be a place that can be tough on body image, as I alluded to earlier. So if your kids don't want social media, I would not make them be on social media. Texting is one of those things that I think every kid should learn how to do. Because that is how most people make plans nowadays. And so sometime between, say, elementary school and high school, you're going to transition from, dad or mom or, caregiver makes the plans to your kid makes their own plans and then checks in with you and then wants a ride. And at that, like think about in like when you were in high school, like 10th grade, 11th grade, your parents didn't call other people's parents to make plans for you, right? They might have been involved at some point in deciding, how you were going to get there or if you had permission, but they weren't the drivers of the plan. So work your way back and think about when you would like to stop being your kid's social director, and then think about how you're going to work on that skill. And I will say again that the pandemic has affected that, at least in my family. Like I feel like we're a little behind there and it's something I'm still working on, right? To be really honest, like I'm working on getting my kid and the friends all seem to be kind of working on this skill too, like figuring out plans on their own because they've had so little autonomy during this time that they haven't moved into this place of doing it themselves. And there may be some gender differences there as well. I'm certainly seeing at least some girls that I know being very advanced on this topic, uh, and it hugely ranges too. There are, I'm sure, plenty of boys who are doing this really well, and boys and girls who need a lot of support on this still. Um, but sometime between 9 and 15, you probably want your kid to learn how to make their own plans, and so they're going to need to learn to text. Here's another question: what's the right way to monitor your child's behavior in text? Well, we talked about, or I've talked about, how you don't want to just be covertly monitoring, but I do think we want to teach kids how to text, and we want to actually role play some of these things before they're even texting. And we also want to maybe start when they're texting with a very limited world. Maybe they're texting on your phone before they even have a phone, and they're just texting a cousin or grandma, or a very forgiving audience, in other words, and you're kind of working out some of the kinks there before they go texting everyone. Just know too that when kids start texting and they immediately want to text the whole grade, and that's like a whole thing in middle grades and middle school for some kids, not all kids, that is going to be annoying for your kid. But they may want to be in it, but also feel left out if they're not part of it. But if they're in it, it's also annoying. So that's sort of a can't win situation that just goes away after a while. So by 8th grade and beyond, like, they will not be doing this anymore. So that's good. How much screen time is enough for a 3rd grader in a kindergarten? Well, no kid has like a minimum that they need to survive. When I was little, my dad would check me for soda pop deficiency syndrome. Like how much Coca-Cola and 7-Up did I need, which we drank with dinner every night because it was the 70s. But anyway, but obviously he was also being sarcastic, because of course we can all survive without Coca-Cola and 7-Up, as my child has proved in his deprived young life. So there's no minimum, but I would also look at what brings you joy and what works for you. And if you need some time where your kid is doing tech. I mean, it's hard to be honest about this as parents, but most of us have needed the screens sometimes as a way to keep our kids busy so we can survive, especially when we've been working from home during this time, and especially if we haven't had adequate childcare. So I would look at your own needs too, and then also look at what works for your kids. Maybe for your 5-year-old, an hour of Wild Kratts makes them kind of, cranky. So maybe they do better with a half an hour earlier in the day and a half an hour later of TV, for example. And again, the kids who are really busy with other stuff may not have as much time during the week. Someone else asked if kids should get more screen time as they get older. Sometimes it may be the other way around. As your kid gets more homework and more other things going on, they may have less time to have recreational screen time. Again, especially during the school week. When is it too late to restrict access? Too late to set boundaries? Any recommended security devices? I really am leery always of recommending, sort of net nanny kinds of programs and things like that, only because I think it's easy to over rely on them as a parent and believe like, okay, ooh, I got that Disney circle and now I'm all good. Like, you really still need to be in conversation with your kid about tech. You need to recognize that they're going to use tech, please universe soon at other people's homes. Like, I want my kid to finally be able to go visit friends. Like, I'm really hoping that this wave goes away and he can like do that again. And so we have to recognize that, and they can go to the public library, which, hallelujah, like free speech, they can get the full internet there. So we want to make sure that they're prepared. That said, I'm in a small space with 1 kid. I recognize that you may be in a big space with 5 kids and 20 devices. And I recognize that that's going to present some logistical challenges, that you may not be able to do what I do, which is like collect the 3 devices that my kid has a password for and put them away at night and like be pretty solid and sure that I know where they are and he doesn't have them. Right? It's the more devices, the more kids, the more ages and stages, the more you're sort of outnumbered at home as a parent, the harder it is. And so if you want to use a tool like that to help you, some parents love sort of playing God and turning their kids, devices off, or just turning off their TikTok time or whatever. Just know that for some kids that does produce a little bit like, oh, you built the wall. How high is the wall? How can I hack the wall? And you can get into a lot of kind of sneakiness and dishonesty around some of that stuff. So it may be the simpler you can keep the rules, the simpler you can keep it for yourself. Again, for me, taking a device at night and putting it away is very simple versus some of these more elaborate solutions. And it's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to say like, I know you've been using pornography. We have to have a conversation about it. We have to talk about why it's okay for you to be curious about sex and sexuality, to want to know more about bodies and what they do, but this is not a good way to learn about it, and this is why. And I'm concerned about the messages about consent that are here, and I'm concerned about some of the violence. I'm concerned about the industry and what it might be supporting, and ways people are harmed by making pornography. So here's some age appropriate information for you about sex and consent. Here's some other ways to do things, right? It's so important to give kids non-shame based information about sex and sexuality. And especially, like, if you find that they're searching for it, don't ignore it, and don't just get a filter and not talk to them about it. Engage with them, because they're letting you know by that search that they want to know something and that they have questions. And we can't wait until puberty to start talking about this stuff, and especially because puberty is coming for our kids earlier than it came in previous generations. So, if you're thinking like teen years to talk about sex for the first time, I would think significantly younger. And again, 9-year-olds will have different questions than a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, but it's really important that we answer our kids' questions about sex, about death, about violence, about the climate. Like, if kids say, what is climate change, or what's going on with the Ukraine, or what does it mean that there's a new wave of COVID, we don't have the option like our parents did to say, I'll tell you when you're older, or you don't need to know, or I don't want to talk about it. We pretty much have to drop everything and say, I don't really know what the new wave means. Let's look at the, New York Times together, or like, let's get this information in a safe way. And obviously, again, it's a different way. We're going to talk with a 5-year-old differently than a 12-year-old, but it's important to really ask, find out more about what they want to know. Like, if they're asking a question that's hard or awkward, like, what do they really want to know? How can we safely get this information together? If you really are in a pickle where it's very difficult for you to talk about some of this stuff, and some of us were raised in ways that make it really challenging to have these hard conversations, make sure that they can talk to their pediatrician or their school counselor or someone else you trust about the question that they've raised. But what we don't want to do, and we need to let our kids know, is we don't want them going to the internet for the answers to life's big questions, whether it's sex or is Santa Claus real. We don't want our kids going to the internet for these things, right? It's so important that they have adults that they can talk to that are safe and informed, and good books, right? Good, safe books, and especially about some of these tough topics. And I don't just mean sex, I mean death and dying, other things, right? Kids will ask hard questions, and we don't want them going to Discord. We don't want them going to the randos in their anime Discord. We don't want them going to YouTube. And seeing a video of, a body decomposed after death. Like, that's not what we want. We want to have real conversations with our kids. Okay. Some of the future technologies are yet to be invented. The landscape's always changing. What's the best future-proof way you can recommend for middle schoolers? I would say the most important thing is, remember, a follower is different than a friend, right? And so when I think about my own middle school years, I had 2 friends, and that would have been a very hard number to have posted on Instagram, like 2. And having your numbers be public is one of the hardest things about social media. It is a complete head trip for me. And I feel very secure as a middle-aged person. Like, I've had years of therapy. I'm way out of middle school, like pretty darn secure. And, if someone unfollows me on Twitter, I might feel a little bit like, why did they unfollow me? Was my tweet not smart? And so think about how that is for kids who are already constantly evaluating themselves socially. So it's so important to remember that kids need to know what a real friend is. And a real friend is the person who shows up for you, who is happy to see you, who is there for you, and you're there for them. And for me, that number in middle school was 2. But we want to think about quality and not just quantity. And I'm still friends with those women. So those were quality friends, right? I didn't have the quantity of friends. And so if your kid is all about getting followers and all of that, they could be having the time of their lives, and that could be fine. But if they are lowering the bar in order to get followers, if they are not being very picky about who they're kind of letting into their world because they're all about the numbers, then I would be concerned. Right? Just being a social butterfly, that could be fine. That could be who your kid is, right? You could have a kid who's a performer, who's outgoing, who really wants to, do silly dances on TikTok and loves having followers. But if it becomes an obsession, or if you see them changing their personality in order to kind of bring that in, that's concerning. So that's what I would say to future-proof your middle schooler, is focus on the quality of what a real friend is. And that's a great thing about watching TV with our kids, is we can watch, even for little kid TV, is that animated character being a good friend right now? Like, I mean, again, we don't want to turn every moment into a teachable moment, but there are some opportunities to really talk about the way people treat each other, or even the way, animated animals treat each other on shows that are great ways to model for our kids. Um, let's see, how much social media is appropriate for teenage girls? What platforms should teenagers avoid? There's no good and bad platforms. Snapchat, you could worry about because the images disappear, but a lot of girls I've talked to feel like Snapchat is lower pressure because the images disappear. The flip side is you might worry that a kid might send an explicit image in an app like that, but the thing is, kids do that just over text. So there's no good apps or bad apps. I would say that ideally for a new phone user, maybe you're starting just with texting and then you're adding, if you allow them to add a social app, it's maybe one at a time and you're getting to know how to interact and be with people in that app, as opposed to here's the phone, you're learning to text and you're learning 3 or 4 different apps at the same time. That's a lot of social learning at a time in life where there's a lot going on. And our kids have all been through something. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that our kids have been through and are going through a pandemic. And so this is a time of some extra concern. This is a time when, like, if in doubt, I would like go get a telehealth appointment with a therapist to check it out, right? Like, just, if in doubt, like, check out your concerns. And if screens are a cause of conflict in your family and it's ongoing and you're having a really hard time, I would get a second opinion, even if it's a one-time sit down with a family therapist. You're not necessarily committing to a life on the couch, right? But getting that support could be really good, because it might be that the conflict isn't even really about screens. It might be about something else. Or this might reveal something that will be helpful to work on. Or just getting that third-party insight will help all of you kind of come to some agreements, if this is a huge source of conflict. What's a realistic game limit for elementary school kids, taking into account the continued limitations imposed by the pandemic? How do you feel about virtual playdates and collaborative video games? I feel great about virtual playdates and collaborative video games. I think, again, once we get the warmer weather and we may be able to get our kids outside in person, it might be nice to do some of that, virtual stuff, and then like follow up at the park. And if the kids play a game, based on Among Us or based on Minecraft, don't worry about it. We played games based on, really problematic movies and TV, if you remember, and so that, like, it's okay, but I would say I would much rather see a kid playing Minecraft with friends than totally isolated, for sure. And they do get a lot out of it, and even some very shy kids have made really great social gains in these spaces. We just want to encourage them also to do the in-person, which I know they have in-person school, so that's a great place where they are interacting. And the teachers are aware too of, it's hard to deal with. I mean, my kid at his school is eating lunch, all facing in one direction. But the teachers are very aware and giving the kids a lot of chances to collaborate in class with their masks on, to kind of make sure, because part of the learning is about learning to talk to one another, right, and engaging with one another. So we want to give our kids those chances, but I think virtual playdates are great, and I think that there are some kids who are probably thriving even more socially because of this time, and because we've all had to be so creative and support our kids to connect. There are even virtual improv classes and all kinds of things that you can look at if it's not safe for your family right now to resume kind of in-person extracurriculars. And I would also really look at outdoor time, even in the cold, as another option. My family has certainly spent some time even playing chess outside, playing Magic the Gathering outside with other kids. So if kids are motivated, they will wear a down coat and go play Pokemon, the card game outside. Let me just look at some of these other questions. I know we need to wrap up. What detrimental effects does regular screen time have on kids? Do the benefits outweigh the detriments? I don't believe there's a detriment to screens themselves, right? That is the whole foundation of my research and my work, is an optimism. I believe we want to mentor our kids more than monitor and limit. Again, that doesn't mean I would give a 7-year-old or even a 15-year-old a phone to have in their room overnight, but I do think tech is going to be part of our kids' lives. Our kids are going to get their first job, from applying online. They're going to potentially meet their partner in life, potentially on the internet, right? Some of us maybe met our partners on the internet. So a lot of good things have happened in my life because of tech, because of the internet, because of connectivity. and our kids are going to be the same, right? And they're going to be activists, they're going to be solution thinkers. So I don't think tech is bad for our kids. I just think we need to think about what they're doing with tech, who they're doing it with, when they're doing it, and really try to build a good basis for a connected life that works for them and that doesn't overshadow and overbalance some of the other things they need to do, like hang out with people in person and sleep and eat and be humans, and also be with themselves and be alone, right? We don't want our kids to never have an opportunity to be bored, to daydream, etc. So I think that's really important. Let's see. Skipping around in these questions. These are really great questions. I think I have answered most of the questions. Are there questions that have come up in the chat
I
since I
don't see
was?
anything new up there.
Okay, I
New
am happy
Q&A.
to stick around. You can, if you want to join my mailing list, again, you can either go on raisingdigitalnatives.com and sign up or text the word tech to 66866. If you want to just say hi on Twitter sometime, I'm at Devorah Heitner. If you're like unplugged and not using social media anymore, like I totally get you. I think that there's so many times where we do have to ask ourselves, and I do know people who've been kind of a little bit less on social during this time because it's been problematic for them in some way, or they've decided to take a break. And these are things we can talk with our kids about. If you found that you were loving a certain social app and you don't feel that way anymore, you can talk with kids about it. There's a way to do that without moralizing to them, but just say like, wow, or maybe email. Like some of us used to compulsively check our email 60 times a day, and maybe you've cut down. So those are some good things to check. I see somebody in the chat here. I noticed
Mhm.
some moms edit their kids' video and help them post on Instagram. What do I think about that? Um, I mean, I think it depends. If your Instagram is a family collaborative project, like a mother-daughter TikTok or a mother-daughter Instagram, or whatever, that could be fun. If you want to make a habit of being an influencer, like the Holderness family, and I think there's a lot. I mean, I wonder about those kids. I hope they're happy. I hope it's okay with them that their families kind of put their family into the spotlight that way. I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want my family to be, that exposed. But I think everyone is polishing their image on the internet in some way, is the flip side, right? Everyone is performing, and it's important to let kids know that. I mean, I guess that's the corollary to my message about, know who your real friends are, is also know that everybody is kind of performing, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Instagram, on TikTok, and that real life is unloading the dishwasher and doing your homework and like, tying your shoes. I mean, so much of real life is kind of mundane and boring, and so much of real life that's wonderful and transcendent is going out with your dog in the snow and seeing your dog get all excited. It's not the filtered picture that you put on social media. So I think it's important for kids to have that perspective, and also um, not to worry so much about what other people are doing in the end. If you think other people are kind of over the top on social media, you can certainly let your kids know you think that, but you can also see what they think, because they may come to that conclusion on their own. And sometimes I find that, at least in my own parenting and in my mentoring relationships with other kids, that it's interesting to see what kids' judgments are. And sometimes kids, have really good insights about stuff like that. So we may not even need to sort of tell them what to think. They may just kind of get. Well, thank you so much for bringing me into your community, and feel free to, reach out with questions later. I know Screenwise is in your library in Glenview, so feel free to, go grab it from the library if you want to read it and talk about it with other parents. And remember too that other parents are a resource too, that, whether it's your kids, friends, parents, or parents of older kids that you may know in the community, sometimes parents of kids a year or two older than yours can be great resources of like, what do you wish you'd known before you got your kid a phone? Or I'm thinking about getting my kid a Nintendo. What do tell me everything I should know, ups, downs, and going to other parents for that kind of advice, or if you have siblings with older kids, or, can be so helpful. And sometimes, you're not going to do what they say because it's not going to work for your family, but it's still just great to talk with other families. And I think right now, I know for me, I'll just say as a mother, one of the things I miss the most is the other parents that I would see at drop off. And, like I'm missing that parent community right now because of the pandemic. And I think anything we can do, even if it feels weird, but just like reaching out to somebody, whether it's locally or around the world, could be really supportive right now, and just also make us feel less isolated as parents, because this has been a really rough time. So also just want to say that I feel you, like hang in there. I hope it's getting better. But if it feels like you've been at the end of your rope a lot in the last few months, that's very understandable. So thank you so much for being with me tonight. This is really a fun chance to be with your community.
Thank you for coming and sharing with us, and thank you everybody for participating and joining us. This will be available as a recording, and we'll send something out to all of the people who RSVP'd, so you have access to see it again, or if someone you know wasn't able to join us, they can catch it. Thank you again. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.